Hello everyone. Today's video is another Q&A video talking today about binders, a couple of questions about biofilm disruptors, and a question about using creatine in someone who's pretty sick and depleted, to put it quite blatantly. As per usual, nothing I'm saying should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. If you need medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. So the first question here, it says, the problem with breaking down severe phase 2 biofilms is the insane Herx reaction that follows. Dr. Berg explained this in one of his YouTube videos, how the inflammatory byproducts of the reaction can lead to bile sludge, which can really impact detoxification, especially with bowel movements. You're spot on with using IV chelators for the toughest biofilms. I've never used anything more effective than IV chelators, but had to take bile salts to avoid the detox issue I was having, as previously mentioned. Have you encountered this with your patients? So yeah, thank you for the question. I don't use IV chelators very often for my patients who are dealing with biofilm issues. We usually use oral chelators. I think that using IV chelators can be really helpful if we have reason to suspect that there are blood vessel biofilms, like on the endothelium. But generally speaking, we don't usually use those types of chelators. So just as a point of clarification, not sure exactly what I said in that video. It looks, but from the picture of it, looks like a pretty old video, so I'm not sure exactly what I said there, but we don't generally use IV chelators. The oral seems to do the trick in majority of cases. With that being said, I think IV chelators can be a stronger way to break down biofilms, but usually the problem we run into with chelators is not that they're not working fast enough, it's that they're working too aggressively. So we start really low, we gradually build up. But if there was a case where I thought, man, oh man, we really need to up the ante here, we might use IV chelators. So just wanted to clarify that. What I think a significant part of what Dr. Berg said there is on point. I haven't listened to Dr. Berg talk about biofilms and all of that, but just how, as it was paraphrased here, about the inflammatory byproducts leading to biliary sludge. So I think the possibly that being what can drive like a crazy Herx or a severe insane Herx, as was referenced here. There certainly are inflammatory byproducts that can be released from biofilms. Part of the issue, to my understanding, is also the release of microbes themselves from the biofilm, which I guess one could argue is an inflammatory byproduct, but I think referring to that probably refers more to the actual parts of the biofilm itself. So just as a little point of clarification there, it's not just about supporting those, the detoxification of those inflammatory byproducts, but also dealing with the microbes that are coming out of hiding as well. It's certainly very important to make sure that the bowels are moving well when we're working with biofilm disruption, and that would be certainly more important if we're dealing with intestinal biofilms, but also with more systemic biofilms as well, from say like Lyme, co-infections, mold, that kind of thing. So making sure that the bowels are moving regularly, super important. I mean, it's just good life advice in general, because if our bowels are sluggish, then that's going to interfere with a lot of detoxification process, because we get rid of the vast majority of toxins through our bowels, to my understanding. But in terms of needing to work with things like bile salts in order to help mitigate Herxes related to phase 2 biofilm disruption, it's not something I see the need for super often in my experience, to be honest. I have colleagues who talk a lot about using biosalts, like TUDCA being a very popular one. Other colleagues who talk about using cholagogues, like different things that get the bile flowing more efficiently from the liver and gallbladder to help to mitigate Herx reactions. And there are some patients where I've definitely found that to be helpful, but in a lot of cases I find that we don't need to work with those things. So just in my experience, sometimes very important, but oftentimes we just go low and slow enough with the dosing of the phase 2 biofilm disruptor, and then it seems to go quite well. I would say that the more common things that I find the need for when there's a flare-up happening from a phase 2 biofilm disruptor would be either antihistamines or more mast cell stabilization support, more antioxidant support, so oftentimes in the form of glutathione and like upping the dose of that, but sometimes we'll work with things like methylene blue, or we'll work with molecular hydrogen in that regard. And then also just making sure that that we have a strong enough, robust enough dose of antimicrobials to deal with any of the microbes that come out hiding as well. So so those are like the top contenders in my experience. And then sometimes systemic binders, which I'm going to talk about systemic binders in just a minute here. The one I usually work with is something called Pectisol, but there are some other options out there as well. So another question here, it took a long time talking about that one, so I'm going to paraphrase this one here. So this one is a question on one of my other videos about high-dose creatine. And so the person says that they've been taking creatine a lot lately. They've been chronically sick, having a microscopic colitis flare. They've lost weight. They're postmenopausal. They've lost a lot of muscle mass. They have regained some weight, but it's mostly just kind of going straight to their waist. And so they're wondering if creatine would be helpful or detrimental in a case like that. So of course, not giving any direct advice for this case, but creatine, in my experience, it's generally really, really well tolerated. And when we look at what creatine does, where it's helpful for muscle growth, seems to be helpful for exercise recovery, which of course ties in with muscle growth, seems to have some anti-inflammatory effects, and then it also just takes some of the burden off of our cellular physiology, probably not needing to methylate quite as much, because methylation's a big creatine synthesis is a big part of what we spend our methylation resources on, and then also just acting as a backup energy source for the mitochondria, so maybe taking a bit of strain off the mitochondria. I find that creatine is usually just sugar and spice and everything nice. I don't find that it's problematic. Some folks, if they build up their dose too quickly, might get some bloating, but outside of that, generally really, really well tolerated. And that bloating, which is typically in the form, actually from water retention, as long as we build up the dose gradually enough. So if a patient starts it too quickly, they get some water retention, feel some bloating, just lower the dose till not feeling the bloating, and then gradually increase it at a pace that's not leading to any rebound bloating, and virtually everyone can tolerate creatine. There's of course going to be exceptions to that, because nothing applies to everyone, but generally really well tolerated. And the next one is any thoughts on using microchitosan and nanozeolite, like ACZ nanozeolite, for mold detox? We often use activated charcoal, but this doesn't get into the blood or nervous system like the other binders. I usually use Pectisol. I am very familiar with zeolite. I know about microchitosan. I just haven't used it before. So with zeolite, I've posted some other videos about this. Please feel free to cross-reference those for more detailed explanation, but I've generally been quite underwhelmed with the results that I've seen from zeolite. I know some practitioners swear by it. I'm just saying what I've seen in my practice, and a number of patients coming in on zeolite, and I've seen it flare some people up, and then when they get over the flare, it doesn't seem to actually have any net benefit. And then I've seen it several other patients, I should say, try it and not really see any change, but probably like a sum total of 15-ish between 15 to 20 patients, I would estimate, who have been on zeolite that I've worked with. So not a ton. So maybe I'm missing the boat on the zeolite, but that's just been my experience with it. So I've been quite underwhelmed by what I've seen so far. I really don't have any clinical experience with the microchitosan. Pectisol, which is modified citrus pectin, that I have seen some really good results with, not across the board with everyone, but I would say in a majority of cases, it's been a helpful systemic binder. And yeah, sometimes we just want that systemic binder to help mitigate inflammation and bind stuff up before it has to go all the way down into the intestines. Let's bind it prior to, so it can be really helpful. And then the last question here, another biofilm one. So it says, can it help to start a protocol with just biofilm disruptors in order to prep for antimicrobials so that the antimicrobials have a stronger impact once they are added? Really good question. Some clinicians out there say absolutely yes. They recommend doing biofilm disruptors before starting anything else, before starting a diet, before doing testing even, saying like, let's just crack things open and see what the playing field really is like. I don't recommend that for my patients, because my thinking cap, when I put it on, it says, well, if we bring everything out to the open and the patient's already feeling bad from everything else that's already in the open, we're probably going to make them feel worse. And then we see, flare-ups from biofilm disruptors on a semi-regular basis, even when we go gradual. So putting them on a full strength dose right out of the gate just doesn't really make logical sense to me. So some clinicians do it. I don't do it personally, and the way I do things seems to work quite well. So I'm going to keep doing it that way. If you don't mind, please taking a quick moment to like, share, subscribe, and or post a quick comment on the video. I would really appreciate it. So thanks in advance for taking a second to do that.